Hey Matt, so a lot of people have been asking us, is exercise order important? So I thought we should talk about it.
Let's take it to the bikes. Yeah, so exercise order is important in a way where you're working the largest muscle groups or muscle mass in that grouping first prior to the smaller muscles. So for example, if you're going to be working the chest muscle grouping, you're going to work a compound movement in a chest press or a bench press, either dumbbell or barbell, whatever it may be, and then working like the triceps, so to speak. So like
Yeah.
that is a smaller muscle in that grouping versus the larger pectoral muscles. And you can do that either in upper or lower body. It just depends on like what areas of the body you're working in what order. So
Yeah. Well, and when we look at metabolic demand, even thinking about like upper versus lower, there's some research out there that would argue you should always start with like a leg press or a big movement, which is using all of your big lower body muscles, because that's going to create the biggest metabolic demand. And so it's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck in, one exercise.
yeah.
But that doesn't mean if you start, on your glutes or your hamstrings that you're not getting a good workout. And we use different exercise techniques to pre and post exhaust those muscle groups. But overall, when we're looking at metabolically, yes, you typically do want to start with the most, biggest, most bang for your buck exercise. And then, if you want to do biceps and triceps at the end, they're still important muscles, but doing those first isn't really super, super effective in terms of overall, if we're looking at, the health data, if you're looking to make body composition changes with strength training, those types of things.
Yeah. Like if you're a runner and you wanted to do calf raises, I would not program that to be the first thing you do in your strength workout.
Yeah.
Not that it's like there's a problem with that, but like that is something that you can do afterwards. The calves are also one of the most mechanically advantaged muscle in the body, so they're very strong. You can move a lot of weight. And so like when you're looking at the load overall, if you're doing a leg press, you're working the calves or any type of like lower body movement that's causing you to push through your leg, that you're working the calves in sort of a way, if those muscles are fatigued, like the bigger muscles, the quads, hamstrings, glutes, and then after the whole exercise routine for lower body, that's when I would have you do the calves because they can still take that load because they are very strong.
Right.
Same thing with like a wrist curl or something like that.
Yeah.
If you had some sort of injury in your wrist, I would do that at the end of an exercise routine just so we're not like hanging on the chin up and your hands are dying.
Yeah. So
because you can't use your wrists.
Right. That was going to be my next point is, if you're, we do group workouts, like why can't we just go in a different order? And although it might not be, even if you did do wrist curls and then tried to hang from the chin up, if for some miracle you can hang on, it's not saying that your, lats and biceps aren't going to benefit from that chin up, but more so those forearm muscles are smaller. They're going to wear out and they're not as fatigue resistant. In terms of like also combining that then with a grip and trying to work your lats, which are one of the biggest muscles in your upper body. So typically we want to start with something like a chin up, a chest press, an overhead press. Also, those are all multi-joint movements where again, you're using a bit more muscle mass at the beginning, and then you're going to those smaller muscle groups or single joint exercises. You can also pair a single joint exercise with a multi-joint exercise if it's something like a pullover or a pec fly where you're respectively working your lats and your pecs, because again, those are a much bigger muscles in your upper body in comparison to something like your biceps and triceps, which are also single joint. But it's not going to take away from the next exercise. So we don't want, there is strategy involved in exercise order, and when trainers are programming, we don't just pick exercises willy-nilly. We always have a reason, but also in different scenarios, it's kind of good to change up the order to kind of see how your body responds and how fatigue resistant different parts of your body are. So that's another point.
Like what Morgan said, like basically having the limiting factor of the exercise be the largest muscle possible. So if you're on a chin up, those lats are going to be the part that's going to be fatiguing almost first. We want that to be first as much as we can, not the wrist or the hand, like the grip being that limiting factor. So that's where like some people might use like straps for hanging on to dumbbells because we don't want them to drop the dumbbells while they're working the legs, which is totally two different areas of the body.
Right. And last note on kind of what resistance to choose in exercise order, you'll notice if you do like a chest press and then a row and then an overhead press, you might not be able to move as much weight on the overhead press as if the next day you start on the overhead press and then do chest press, you know, as your second push exercise, because the triceps are involved in both of those movements, as well as like some of your anterior deltoid, and there are some overlapping muscles. So that's another thing to consider when you're thinking about choosing what resistance to use. If you're doing your own workouts, you might not be able to lift your heaviest if that exercise isn't first. So if you're looking to do, you know, your best on an exercise, then you should definitely start with that. And it doesn't mean just because you did it one day and you can't do it the next, but it's in a different order that you got weaker. It's just that you've pre-exhausted. That's a science term that we use here, to use those muscles once already. Now they're tired. So that's another thing to consider in programming. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're being less effective.
So to recap, using the largest muscle groups in the exercise, using an exercise that is going to be first in that routine order, and not having the limiting factor be a smaller muscle group in that, or a smaller muscle in that muscle group. And then that metabolic demand can be so much higher, and that's what you want to get out of that workout. So
you want to give the most energy to the exercises. That's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck, because we are always looking to keep you safe, but also to give you the best results in the least amount of time. That's what we're all about here. So that is all you need to know, and we'll see you next time.